figured I would record a quick little reading update while my supper is reheating in the oven. I read an entire book. It's a nonfiction book. I don't typically, or at least recently, I have not been in the habit of updating as I go with nonfiction books. Sometimes I do, but a lot of the time there's just not a lot to say. There's not like a narrative to follow, or at least not in the case of this kind of nonfiction. And what I read was called Before the Parade, A History of Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual People in Halifax. It's about queer history in Halifax from like the 70s into the 80s. I enjoyed this book. There was a lot of really interesting insights into it's specifically centering Halifax, but it does include references to stuff in other provinces. So there were a couple little mentions of PEI, a couple little references to like New Brunswick and Fredericton in particular. And that's like all kind of my frame of reference, like places I've lived. Like I'm from PEI, I now live in New Brunswick. And like my sister used to live in Halifax, so I've been there a few times. So it was like interesting to read about queer history in places that are like actually familiar to me, and to like actually have some frame of reference for like the places they're talking about and the kinds of historical happenings that they're talking about. And just to learn more about like how active the queer community was even back then, and like what kind of like inner community politics were going on, what kinds of things did people agree on, disagree on, how did gays and lesbians get along. I will note it says bisexual in the title, but there's not a lot that is specifically about bisexual people and their experiences. I can only think of like one figure specifically that like is bi and was like, it talked about her experiences as a bi woman during this time. But a thing that is worth noting is that historically, like bisexual, there was a period of time where the term bisexual wasn't used as much, and some women, if they had any attraction to women at all, they would refer to themselves as lesbian, even if they also had some attraction to men. So that may also be like what's at play here. I don't recall the book mentioning that, but I do know that that is a thing. It is also worth noting, and this is just because of the historical language, it uses I'm not going to say it because now it is like much more pejorative and much more considered a slur, and like people don't use it as much, or at least like, I mean, some people do still use it, but like the D slur was used a lot, and to an extent the F slur. So be aware of that going into it, that like that is the historical language that was used. It was also really interesting to see the way that the queer community overlapped with things like feminist movements, but also there was like a lot of gay church groups, which was really interesting, and like church organizing among queer people and stuff like that. And that was just like, I didn't expect that. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Overall, I did enjoy reading it. I will say sometimes like it is the type of book that I feel like I maybe should have been taking notes while I read so I could keep track of what was happening simultaneously, like, because it would like kind of go over broad issues or subjects. And so it would go over, like it didn't tell things in a linear way, and that sometimes made it a little confusing to be like, wait, okay, so 1974, what else was going on in 1974? Like, so I maybe like if I ever reread this book, I would like try to make a timeline so I could keep track of that stuff better. I also found sometimes the writing, like just the way things were phrased, was a little bit unwieldy or like hard to parse. So like that, I wish maybe there had been a little bit of reworking of some of that just to make things a little clearer and like easier to follow. But overall, I did really, really enjoy this book. I would love to find more books like this about like different areas in the Maritime, especially Charlottetown and Fredericton, or just PEI and New Brunswick in general. I would also like to find stuff that does more seriously engage with bi history, because like I'm bi, that's what I'm very interested in learning more about that. And I feel like this book only kind of like lightly touched on the issues that bi women were dealing with, because we're talking about like lesbian separatism and how bi women were excluded from that because they were seen as like betraying the movement by being attracted to men, which is still a problem. That is still a thing that bi women have to deal with. I want to find more like books or articles or papers or whatever that deal with those topics. So I'm going to be keeping an eye out for that. Overall, I think I'll give this book like a 4. If you're ever curious about queer history in Halifax and a little more broadly the Maritimes, definitely check this one out. It's kind of cool to read a book that's like so obscure. Like, this definitely isn't a book that's being widely talked about in the book community, and so it's very fun to find it and get to read it. And this book technically counts for bi bingo because the author is bi. So even though the book didn't talk about bisexuality a whole lot, the author is bi. And I'm debating, I might get more lax with my rules for some of my categories. And I'm debating on putting this one down for sex work because it did talk a little bit about sex work in the queer community. Not in any great detail, but it came up several times throughout. So I am considering including this for sex work because I'm just not sure where else I'm going to find a book that deals with sex work. But those are my thoughts for now. If I come back in with a clip at the end, you know I decided to check it out for a book about sex work. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, put some kind of rainbow emoji down below. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!